Testing. There were, they are on. Okay. We are live. Hello and welcome to Titillating Talks. This is the space where we have conversations that you may not be able to have in polite company. And we are going to be going into that definitely today. So I am so grateful to be able to host. My name is Kerry Goring, aka Kerry Sutra, and I am just ecstatic to be able to be in this space where we can talk about some things. And I am going to be doing this evening with two of my fabulous guests that are sitting right beside me. I'm going to kind of read this piece out because I guess a part of this should be sort of formal, sort of. So, what we are talking about today is becoming a good ancestor and what that really means. So, this conversation is going to touch upon ancestry, lineage, and how I think for me anyway, a part of what I really am interested in diving into is how these histories of our ancestors, of our experiences have shown up in the ways that we are people of color. Um, Again, let me introduce who I was talking to today. We are talking to the amazing Erika Smith, right? Erika. And the fascinating, that was the word I liked, fascinating Ashley Buck. Erika Smith is a descendant of the freedom seekers who followed the Underground Railroad into freedom and settled in the Niagara region. She is the co-founder of A Matter of Black, which I so love the name of. I was like, that is so cool. Right? That is just so cool. I was like, that's all right. That's all right. And is a member of the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association. And Ashley Buck, and please just allow me this space. I'm going to try and pronounce this properly. Is Ashanaguga? Ashananuga? Ashan from the Ashanaga? Okay, I do not want to butcher, and it's actually something for me that I really want to make sure I honor. So please, Ashley.
Onondaga.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I said that right. Onondaga from Six Nations of the Grand River. She is a past executive member of the Regional Native Center's Board of Directors, and Ashley has spent her entire career working with racialized and marginalized people. It is, that's okay. It just gives us a little pep. Gives us a little pep. It is in those experiences that has shaped her motivations to create profound change in the world, which I think is such an incredible message. I can't wait for us to get more deeper into this. So with that being said, this is going to be a juicy conversation. And before we go there, though, before we go all the way in, I would ask if we can take just a moment for me to be able to offer up a land acknowledgement. And so for me, when I think about doing a land acknowledgement, it is also about creating a space that makes it personal for me. So I normally ask everybody who is with me, and if you are on the stream right now, to just take a minute with me where we take a deep breath together, where we inhale and we exhale and just kind of settle into this moment for us to truly be able to pay homage. And so with that, I want to acknowledge the settlers on this land, and I want to pay homage to the stewards of this land. I want to acknowledge that we are settlers in the Niagara region, and it is the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Wendat and Shawanoton peoples. I want to call attention to the names of these clans and these distinct tribes that existed on this land. Because in my mind, simply just acknowledging the land does not come, does not do justice to the vast identities of the peoples that lived on the land. And in fact, in my mind, it simply continues to perpetuate a problem where these gestures of land acknowledgements seem performative. And it's more about placating our colonial guilt rather than offering a real sense of justice and resolution. I think it's important for us to point out that the territories that we live in, that we work in, are governed by the Upper Canada Treaties and are within a land treaty protected by the dish and with one spoon wampum agreement, a pact by the above mentioned tribes to protect this land, something that the colonial powers have disordered time and time again. I want to bring awareness to the many ongoing challenges and victories of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. For instance, I'm calling an awareness to the cancellation of Mackenzie Meadows. It was a housing development that was slated to be built on the unceded land of the Six Nations peoples that bordered the town of Caledonia, Ontario. But because of the resistance efforts put forth by the Six Nations defenders, the entire project was canceled indefinitely. Land back means exactly that, land back. And it's not enough for us to further tokenize the taking of these lands without celebrating those victories that are masked by the rightful guardians of this land. It is them that stand in power to take back what they have given their life blood for, to protect, and their own sovereignty. I want to acknowledge the missing and Indigenous women and children and men who have been the casualties of this brutal insurgency of occupation since settler contact. And yes, the wounds go deep. It is with great honor that I stand in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples of this land as a generational victim of forcible displacement, because I am an African Caribbean descendant whose ancestors have been stolen from their land. We share mutually in this understanding of the cultural travesty that happens at the hand of colonialization and what that lends to any group of people that this process of being colonized creates. It is because of the sacrifice of the Indigenous peoples of this land that we have shamelessly benefited from. And to me, that brutal truth needs to be acknowledged. The legacy of colonialism, capitalism, has shattered the systems and natural ways and existences for original peoples of this continent. And it is worth each one of us taking a deep lesson from it, because it's safe to think about and remember that when they come for one people, history denotes that they will always come for all. And I will end this with an African salutation, which is Ashe. And Ashe is yes, a reminder we are in memorandum. Ashe, Asheo. Right? All right. And so with that, let's get on to all the good that we got for you today. And let's begin with just talking about where we are. So who wants to start? Oh, okay. I see where this is going. I'm ready. Go for it. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. I really do. I do. But again, I think I wanted to set the stage. I genuinely wanted to set the stage because a lot of the times, I believe when we have these conversations, it's we come off as kind of clinical, or it's, we're talking about this from a space of what the history books may have said, or the sense of we're here and then we're there. But what I want us to do today is really get into what this means, what this sense of our ancestry has brought into the reality of how we exist in this world. And so with that, I don't want to put any words in anybody else's mouth, but hopefully that sets the stage a little bit. And then I'm going to pass this over.
And thank you for that beautiful land acknowledgement. Actually, on the way up here, Ashley and I were talking about how, as you said it well, like clinical land acknowledgements have been, and it's become like what I said on our way up here was, it's like everybody kind of ignores the anthem in school. Like, I'm a high school teacher, and it's just background noise. And the land acknowledgements, as wonderful as it is that we're giving acknowledgement to our Indigenous peoples, it's very clinical and is much more meaningful to attach your value, your thankfulness, your gratitude to the land and to the sacrifices of our Indigenous peoples, to make it that much more profound and to make it meaningful. And I think that's probably why, like, it was touching to me, and I saw it's touching for Ashley as well. So thank you very much for that introduction. And you also did a great job of kind of grounding us, talking about where we are and why we're here, which is exactly how I wanted this talk to start. So, like, we are on the same level, killing it. So my name is Erika Smith. Smith is my freedom seeker last name. And it definitely has ties to colonialism and the fact that my ancestors were torn from Africa. I did 23andMe, and I thought I was going to get a lot of, I don't know if it's closure, but I thought I was going to feel some type of way about it. And I got my results back, and I was like, cool. I'm sub-Saharan African. Because that's a huge body of land. That's a huge grouping of people. And it meant nothing to me. I was like, all right, cool. Yep, I'm actually Black. I already knew that. Yeah. I mean, in the winter, maybe it lies, but my sisters always joke that the color drained out as my parents continued having kids. And it's true. I am the lightest of them. I get the winter whites, as we call it. But if you can't laugh at yourself, what can you laugh at, really? But yeah, just ancestors. I come from a line of fantastic ancestors, in my own opinion. My intention for today is to talk about what kind of a world we want to recreate, or that we want to create, and what do we care about, and who do we care about it for. So to kind of give you a bit of a background as to my family history, both on my dad's side, both of his parents are descendants of freedom seekers. And on my grandfather's side, John and Margaret Castle, they're my 3 times great-grandparents, and they actually worked with Harriet Tubman in the Fugitive Slave Society. So they were in St. Catharines. They escaped through the Underground Railroad. Neither side of that family actually followed the Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman. However, they did follow all of the connections that she made in order to find their way to freedom, coming from, as far as Virginia in some cases, and just, using those connections and finding their way. And then not only did they get themselves here, but then they worked with Harriet Tubman to organize and document additional freedom seekers. And I just think of the bravery and the courage. I mean, I couldn't, and I think it's in my blood, right? Literally. But I couldn't imagine finding that freedom for myself and then not wanting it for other people. And so it's touching. And then my grandmother, she is a descendant of Adam Nicholson, who followed, again, the Underground Railroad to freedom. And she was an activist in the Niagara region and in St. Catharines. And she inspired me. I grew up right next door to her. And yeah, I was Granny's girl. I'd show her all my pretty dresses, run over to her house. And so I was close with her. I admired her. And I always knew I wanted to be like her in some way. I didn't know how to get involved in activism, but it was like something that played in the back of my mind. Like, I'll get there. I'll figure it out one day. And like, as I'm talking about being a good ancestor, I think setting those goals for yourself, but maybe not knowing how or when you'll get there is important. And it's definitely a part of my history and a part of my story. And there was another thing I wanted to share along those lines, but it's escaping me right now.
It's so okay. It's so okay. Like, I'll give you a minute to kind of regroup, but I just want to offer up just what's coming into my spaces where, as I'm hearing your lineage and your history. For me, first off, just knowing that your ancestors were in such close proximity to Harriet Tubman is just like, I'm like in total fan mode, right? I'm totally fangirling you. It's humbling for me because as I was a child growing up, I come from my family lineage. I'm the daughter of immigrants, and we are from the island. We're from the West Indies. So my mother's Antiguan, shout out, and my father is Bajan. Also got to shout it out. And I read the stories of Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was my idol. As I would read the stories of how, she would not bow down, even when she had been brutalized and beaten and had a traumatic brain injury from, being beaten in the head. And yet she still stood so strong. And for many reasons for me, because I recognize as a Black woman, the experience of our Blackness didn't create the same, we weren't afforded that same space of being delicate, We've always had to stand strong. And in that realm, that there's a whole movement going on right now about having a soft life, right? Moving us forward into that space. But again, it's that understanding that we come from this lineage of strength that I think they wouldn't even have known what they were creating. And so as we're talking about ancestry in this moment, I think about, I thought about the title of this when we were like, what makes a good ancestor? And I thought to myself, it's living your best life. It's doing the pieces of your life's work. And then, we're talking about it in infamy in this point. And I also love that we get to call to light the pieces of help that happened. They organized beside each other. They found their ways through moving and connecting with each other. And so that is such a powerful part of this movement that we still carry into where we are today. Because I know of people of color, that's what we see. I know when I look at both of you, I see you, right? Because of that space. So I love that share. Thank you for that. So standing. So are you feeling complete? Did you remember, or do you want to come back to it? That's kind. Well, I'm sure it will come out as we move forward, right? And so then with that, I'm going to pass the mic over on this side. Right? Ashley got to have her chance. So here we go.
So these conversations are quite intimate, right? They're personal. So as much as we're talking, we can't homogenize our experiences as women who are visibly of color. I think it's important to acknowledge that we're here to have and to tell our truth and to take that unique perspective. So I want to say to Erika, I've known Erika for a very long time. So just even hearing the story again, and we can talk about it more, but it's just beautiful to witness. So Scano, my name is Ashley Buck, and I'm from Six Nations of the Grand River. I've been born and raised here in Niagara my whole entire life. And while we were talking and planning for this, I just kind of realized I do have this beautiful lineage, and I haven't really had the space to kind of talk about it. So the one unique thing about my last name, because that's our focus, being Buck, and is it is a very long line of hereditary chiefs. So I think we hear about that more in the media. What does it mean to be a hereditary chief? But it's not awarded to all families, and not all people are able to access and tap into this through their nations, right? So my father's lineage in Six Nations is a long line of hereditary chiefs up to John Buck, who you can Google. And he's our 5th generation relative, and he's a wampum belt carrier. So I kind of tap into that more and more, and I realize I'm carrying that. And I think when we talk 7 generations, that is my responsibility as I look forward, is to carry that name. And I gave it to my sons as well, which is a bit unique, taking a matrilineal approach. So that was important to me, even just the way in which we migrated to Niagara in groups of families. So all of my dad's aunts moved all of their children at the same period of time. And I've had many conversations with friends about what that looked like and what forced us into the city and how long we've been in St. Catharines. But I think today, just telling that truth and being able to say that we do have a rich history here in Niagara, and it stems from Six Nations, which is our closest reserve, and really setting that intention to be able to tell my truth and to hold space for other truths. And to explore what that looks like, having that Cugus side, which is my dad's side, my mom's Onondaga, but being like a mother, being a sister to bigger groups. So that's kind of sister. Since high school, which was not that long ago for both of us. Right. So we'll explore, I'll explore and I'll dive in deeper, but that's kind of just Erika and I were talking about, just really respecting our last names and what that carries for us and how to move forward.
I love that so much. Interestingly, I'm actually curious to talk about this part of it. So my last name, I'm introducing myself as Kerry Goring, and you can tell my last name is Goring. And so from the islands that I am from, our colonizers were German, hence Goring. And I know that as I learned about who I was, my journey brought me very much back to wanting to know who we were before we were colonized. So again, it was tracing my ancestry and knowing like the names of what sub-Saharan Africa is probably the space. I never did 23andMe because I have my own feelings around that DNA thing. They have my DNA for life. I don't know, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Right? You know what I'm saying?
Do with it what you will.
Right? Again, that is a colonial thing where we just distrust the system. You know, that's kind of something that's ingrained in the blood. You know what I mean? But I felt myself drawn to wanting to touch back into that time and understanding of who we were before we were freedom seekers, before we were taken off of the continent. And so when you recognize and hear the names, like Buck sounds like it's still along the lineage, but Smith and Goring, how does that lend to your own? I think it's almost like an epigenetic memory. Is there a part of you that rebels against it? I don't know. Like, I know for me, there's a part of me that rebels against it, even though I have this rich history on both sides of my family. You know, we were shopkeepers and innovators, and you know, held high positions on either ones of the islands. There's this part of me that the name is the constant reminder of that space of being taken. And I think often when I am in this Black experience, and we know that there are layers to being in it. I mean, I'm dark skinned, right? So that experience of my Blackness is very real. It shows up for me when I think about that being a point that was a pivotal stopping point for me. So I'm just curious, like when you think about it, what comes up for either one of you? Does it come up for either one of you?
I think for me, like, we're proud Smith. Like, when we say that is so Smith, it's because you're being outspoken, you're speaking your truth, or you're being strong, or you're just being your authentic self in any setting. So to me, the last name Smith, and I remember being like confused by honestly the movie Pocahontas, because I was like, John Smith, that's a white guy. Like, what? And it was like, because all the Smiths I knew were Black. And it was just kind of one of those like, oh. Like there's a lot of connections to be made. But I've never felt its colonial roots. And I think that might come from us being proud and having overcome so much from that Smith bloodline, that it's just not, it doesn't remind me of the negative. It reminds me of the strength, the resilience, the bravery, the courage, all of those good adjectives. But yeah, and like truthfully, so I'd mentioned Margaret and John Castle. That's the Smith side of the family. And their son, Aaron Johnson Smith, was the first descendant born free. He was born in Canada, in St. Catharines, and he was so capable after having lived, or having his parents only know slavery, to move here, and he was able to become a podiatrist. And at the time, that was considered an actual doctoral position. So to me, that speaks to the baselessness of slavery, of thinking of Black people as lesser beings, of being animal, or like having a likeness to animals. Because if in the first generation born free, you can produce a doctor, somebody who is that trusted, and not only for the Black community, he worked at the, but it just burnt down. What is it called? In St. Catharines, that big historic building. Why is it escaping me? The something house, the Welland House. Yeah, he worked there. He had an office working out of that building, and it was a building that it was one of the only that would employ Black people. And so he was working there as he had credentials, he had capabilities. So I think it speaks to the strength. So I've never looked at Smith as anything other than that. And we use it as an adjective to describe one another when we're being so Smith.
I love it. I love that. Thank you for that share. That's beautiful.
I share the same sentiments. I feel like Buck, I think in our communities, last names really can dictate where you sit in the community. So my dad's dad is a Dock Stater, which is also a great last name. And then my grandmother on my mom's side is a Claus, which is also a really big last name. But Buck had some big shoes. Like I had to fill them. And in St. Catharines, going back to that local, like we're always trying to keep that rich history here. You'll meet somebody and you're like, oh, are you Buck? Are you related to this Buck? I'm like, yeah. It's a cousin, of course. But I feel like there was pride. But also I think sometimes, and not speaking for everyone, but Indigenous people are born into politics. So things are very political. We are registered people. We belong to the government. That hasn't changed still to this day. We are political people. So I think sometimes knowing that our names came from a place of colonization, that even though we are so proud of them because our generation and our histories are so rich, they were given to us, right? And we have, like we might say, like our Indian name, or we have our name that comes from Longhouse. But even then, a lot of people will switch it when they come into the city, or they'll shorten it to complement. I think a lot of people now are the newer generation that's kind of reclaiming is like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We don't have to lessen ourselves or shrink ourselves. But I find a lot of pride in my name. Yeah, thank you.
It's I'm really enjoying, getting your perspectives, both of you, because again, what comes up for me as I think about this is how the experiences of people of color us melanated folks, is so vastly different, right? Like my experience, again, as a Caribbean, West Indian person, sorry, and what the travel, with my parents having to be displaced. So leaving the West Indies, and actually what's interesting, they left the West Indies, both of them. And my mother went to England, and my dad both met in England. My mother became a nurse, a registered nurse, because they were running a program from the West Indies for nurses because there was a shortage going on in England. And my dad went to drive the trains. So he became an conductor on the trains, and they, met. Apparently it was love at first sight. Like literally my dad met my mom, and apparently after 3 weeks, he would just come and give her fruit. Apparently that's the story. He would show up at the house and not say much because, my dad, he's that strong, silent type. And he'd just give her fruit for about 3 weeks. And then the third week, my mom was like, so, okay, you keep giving me the fruit. Why? And he was like, I love you and I'm going to marry you. Right? Is that not the sweetest story? I love love, right? Anyway, so again, they got married and they had me and my sister. And when they were in England, my mother decided, and literally it was my mother, she filed all the paperwork without my father having any idea that she was going to immigrate here. Seriously. That tells you I come from a long line of very strong women. She decided that she was running into so much racism in England, she couldn't fathom it for the existence for us. So she decided to come to Canada. And I'm from the city. So I'm from Toronto. And when she came to Toronto, I was 3. And some of my earliest memories are of us going to, there's a mall in Scarborough. Actually, it was a grocery store called Safeway. It doesn't exist anymore. But I have memories of us being in that Safeway and peering up at the counter, because you're little. I'm peering up at the counter and my mother is defiantly screaming at the cashier. And I remember her saying, I'm going to pick up that money, because my mother, the cashier, wouldn't accept the money from my mother's hand. She would only take it from if my mother put it on the counter. And I remember my mother standing up and saying, oh, no. Like I didn't understand it then. She was always angry and yelling at people. It seemed to me. But what it really was my mother was asserting herself and showing up as her truth. Because again, she grew up in a world where all of her teachers were Black. All of the politicians, all of the, storekeepers, everybody in her world was Black. So the sense of not being enough or different was very much a shock to her system. And again, when I think about ancestry, when I think about how the experiences of my mother's upbringing versus what happened when I came here and started school even, when I think about the fact that it would have been my great-great-grandmother who was the last one removed from slavery. And like you, there was something that happened where they were pimping by the end of it. They ended up gaining a whole lot of wealth, right? I recognize the resiliency that we all naturally emit. But when I hear the experiences of, the Smiths and the Bucks, which is hotness, well, how did you find being in community here? Did you either one of you ever feel different than? Did either one of you ever know that, you weren't like everybody else? I'm curious because, again, I'm a transplant. I've only been here 10 years, and I could tell you some stories about that. Oh, that's not. I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, we'll keep the order going. So I would say, yeah, I've born and raised in St. Catharines and went to school in what was the Lincoln County Board of Education at the time at Maple Grove. And then I can remember sitting in, I didn't even realize my own Blackness. I was sitting I have this distinct memory when I was sitting in an assembly, and my parents had 3 girls in 3 years. So we were in the same school. Staircases. And I looked over and I could see my sister Sabrina all the way across the gym sitting with the older kids. And I was like, wow, Sabrina's the only Black person here. And when I went home and retold that to my mom, she was like, well, she's Black, you're Black. What? You have the same parents. And it was just, I didn't make that connection. We grew up next door to our Black family members. And I was one of them, and they never made me feel like I wasn't one of them or as any less Black. But I think it had to do with the visuals, the difference in our skin. And like I said, I'm the lightest of the 3 girls. I've got green eyes, brown hair, fair complexion. I tan well. And then growing up in high school, I was the white girl with my Black friends, and I was the Black girl with my white friends. So being biracial, I've always lived that dichotomy of being hyper aware and looking the way that I do. It's everybody's favorite guessing game is when they meet me. Are you Latina? Are you Jewish? Are you Black? And it's always, and everybody tiptoes around the Black, which is funny to me because being a descendant of freedom seekers, my ethnicity is Black with a capital B, because that is my tie to my lineage. Is we're Black. We're not sub-Saharan African. Nobody don't even think half my family would know that that's where our bloodlines tie us to with respect to Africa. But yeah, there's always gatekeepers in every community. And I feel like the Black community has more gatekeepers. Because you can be that token Black girl, within the white community, right? It can be praised or looked up to, or popularized, I'd even say, with hip hop culture, just Black culture being cool. So it was always with the Black group that they made me hyper aware of, oh, that's so white. And being articulate, being in French immersion, being in an enrichment program, it was like, okay, whitey. I'm like, yeah, I am white. But I was also have that strength within me to be like, and what? Yes, I am white. Yes, I am Black. And I learned through my family that within North America, there's the 1 drop rule. So if you've got 1 drop of Black blood in you, you're Black. And that didn't come from the Black community wanting to claim you. It came from the white community wanting to put that distinction on you to make you that lesser than. Okay, well, your bloodline's been sullied by that Black blood. So even if it's as little as 1 drop, you're not part of the white community. You are Black. And I've had absolutely no problem being a part of the Black community. I love Black people. And so I think that would be my take on it. Hyper aware my entire life, even to this day. And sometimes when I'm asked for the Black perspective on things, I'm like me? Me? Oh yeah, me. Yeah, me. It takes a minute, but it's there.
Well, I'm going to interject really quickly, and then I'm going to pass it over. You're touching on some of the layers that exist, so many layers that exist in our understanding of how, and you touched upon it, how this colonial system conquered and divided us. And it created its own caste systems in the way that we see each other. So what you're touching upon is colorism. snag the African earrings. Right? Got to put them up, right? That experience of being, a lighter skinned Black person versus me in my darker skin, that in itself has had challenges in the way that we would interrelate to people. And what I find is so interesting, again, I come back to this understanding of when we think about ancestry, when we think about being in this space, that every one of us has these unique experiences. Because St. Catherine's is, when I will say I definitely had a culture shock when I came out here. And I'm not going to speak on it yet. I'm going to pass the mic over to Ash. But for me, this experience of my Blackness in this town, was something else. But we'll go there afterwards. I'm going to pass that off.
These two are hard to follow up on. I'm with Erika, though. Like, that intersectionality piece, right? Like, my identity is complex in itself to begin with. But I think there's this misconception that this is a historical piece of our identity that's hundreds of years old, but really it's our parents, and up to the 1960s with some of the rules. So when my parents came to St. Catherine's, they were hiding in a church basement with the rest of the natives. And that's where they congregated. That's where they danced. That's where they met, thinking back to years when they couldn't even meet together. So I think my parents worked really hard to make sure that we knew who we were at a very young age. And because my dad grew up a traditional man, and he brought that into our home, even though we weren't traveling all the time to Six Nations, we knew, like, I knew at a very young age that I was just a brown girl. Like, I think we were talking, like, I'm just brown. Like, I know I wasn't white. Right. But it played out in so many different narratives, especially being and identifying as a woman. I feel like I would get, are you Greek? Are you Portuguese? Oh, you look exotic. That's so nice. I know. And I'm like, what'd you say to me? That's not nice. You shouldn't be saying that. But that's how it kind of plays out. But knowing who you are, I think, if anything, going back to your question, I think it was instilled in us at a very young age. Like, this is who you are, and you are going to be different, and people are not going to like that. I ended up going to a multicultural school in St. Catherine's, which is very rare. Very, very rare. Yes. So I went to a school that had a lot of newcomers. So I've had that. And then even going to high school and meeting some diverse people there as well. But I think knowing that my parents worked really hard to get out of Church Street, to make it to the new Friendship Center on Airport Road, to be part of that movement with my grandmother as founding members, I was lucky. But it did not... I have the exact same stories. So,
see all the good shares. We're just doing all the good shares here. I appreciate it. I'm just like feeling in and thinking about both of your experiences, and thinking about my own. I again came to Canada when I was 3. We originally started in Scarborough. And at the time, like, it's incredible for me to like see the area now, but at the time where we were, it was literally still just cornfields. And we were like the new subdivision that had started. And I remember at that point, it was not really very multicultural. We were only there for a little bit of time before my mother decided we were moving on up. And we moved to Markham. And when I moved to Markham, it was a very multicultural area. So I too was really gifted. I grew up around people of all different, creeds, colors, understandings, and I went to Catholic school. And so for me, I didn't even really see color in that way. Then I went on to college and university. Toronto is just very diverse anyway, so it's not a prevalent thing. And then I chose to move out here. Let me just say that I was absolutely in shock when I recognized that you could move an hour and 10 minutes out of the GTA, because roughly, give or take, if you speed a little bit, I do, right? Maybe 20 minutes, hour and 20, outside of this GTA. And you walk into, for all intents and purposes, white people world. Definitely. And I don't say that with vitriol in any way, but I just was not aware of how prevalent, like, white culture was. And with that kind of slap in the face, because that's literally what it was, and especially 10, 12 years ago, having to recognize what it was to not see myself for days. Having to put my children in a school where they would see others who looked like them every day, to now going into a school where they were the Black population, was an interesting adjustment. And for me, it meant that I had to adjust how I approached and stood up. It became that thing where my husband, for example, even now, we live in the north end of town. And I'm starting to see a little more color and some flavor showing up out there. But we live in a subdivision of about 500 houses, let's say. It's a big subdivision. And I know there are 3 Black families, 3. And we know each other by name. We hail each other up when we see each other. That is an experience. My husband likes to run, right? He runs and stuff. And lately, I've been noticing he has a little following. It's so interesting. He'll run in the park, and I see a whole bunch of like people just kind of standing up watching him on the side. And I'm like, I know it. He looks good. I ain't mad at you. I ain't mad at you. But he also will walk to the store and people cross the street. So the experience of our Blackness can be something that's very polarizing, but because we are also rooted, for me, the journey took a stance where I really wanted to understand my African history, because I was raised in a very Christian understanding. One of the great things colonizers do is introduce our Christian understandings to things. And so for me, I went to Catholic school, as I mentioned, and I would get kicked out of class, religion class, every day. I used to just be like, look, my Mr. Platt would be like, Kerry, I'd be like, I know, I'll leave right now. I know, I'll walk out. I'm good. Because something about the doctrination of it just didn't speak to my soul. And I had a unique experience because I went to Catholic school, but my parents, my family was very much Pentecostal and Moravian, which is another derivative out of the Pentecostal sect. And so I would also have to go to those Bible studies, those experiences too. And for me, after all of the religiosity that I got, I was just like, oh, none of this makes sense. So that took me on a journey of wanting to understand what my ancestors, I didn't realize it at the time, but that's really what it was. What was before that? And so I'm mentioning all of that. Let me circle it back. I mention all of that because when I listen to the both of you speak, what I recognize has been the anchor. And what I think is almost unique is that the two of you both have had the ability to trace your lineage. You both have had an anchoring in that knowing of who you are, right? And so when I look at many of the experiences of other Black people and other people who are Indigenous, I don't know, actually not even Indigenous have a little bit more of it, I think. I mean, I do a podcast with Patty Crowick. And so one of the things I love is the conversations I get to be privy to when we speak on this. I'm so blessed that way. But I think there's something to be said about being able to tap into and know your roots, that pride that you have because of the Smith name and because you're a Buck, right? That is rooted in understanding the history, understanding where you come from. So many of us, because we come out of this lineage of slavery, don't have that option. And so when we attach it back to that, that is a space of shame. It can be held up as a place of shame. And I think for me, like when I hear the two of you, I think that that is a powerful understanding. Again, it brings us back to this space of knowing that we all have an individual experience in what it is to show up this way. And so this is going to lead to the next question I have. What do you think? Because I know that as beautiful and as wonderful as this melanation that we all indulge into is a beautiful thing, we also know that there is pieces of the underlying pains and issues that come up from just simply being colonized. What do you feel, and have any insights maybe, because this isn't like a conversation that there is no real one answer, but what do you feel maybe are some advice, maybe some insights that we can offer to others who may not have our anchoring?
Tone, haven't I? I think it would come from, and like knowing your roots, knowing where you came from. It does give you some sort of anchoring, whether it's to the city that you currently reside in or whether it's to this country. I think it brings this actually back to knowing your ancestors, because knowing your ancestors can give you the confidence to know that you belong. You belong somewhere in this world, and even if it's not in the vicinity that you're currently living in, you have a place of belonging in this world. And there's something that people can't take away from you. And as much as being a descendant of freedom seekers, not having any real ties back to Africa, it was them establishing themselves here and making that. So I think even if you're an immigrant and you recently moved to this area, that is an accomplishment of your parents or of you that you are here, that you are learning a new culture, that you are trying to survive and thrive here. And I think that's a starting point. And I would encourage anybody to think, if you feel like you don't belong or that you're out of place, try to think back to like what was it that you brought you to the place that you're sitting in right now, and how can you find some strength and resiliency through that lens? Whether you were a kid who just had to come here because your parents came here, why did they do that? How does that shape who you are and who they want you to be? Because I think when we think about ancestors, especially when I think about mine, and I'm sure when Ashley thinks about hers, like our ancestors accomplished quite a lot. They sacrificed a lot to get us here. So there's some strength that can be found in that. And even if your story is nothing like either of ours, I encourage you to think of how you got here, what sacrifices. And also in the same breath, think about what you want to change, what you would do to make this world better for the future generations, for even the current generation. Because sometimes this like activism, sometimes just, finding that belonging can be instantaneous, but sometimes it's you setting up the next generation to feel that sense of belonging.
Love that. Love that answer. I'm going to pass this up.
I'm not as optimistic. Yeah, I feel like this is by design, especially for Indigenous people. This was the design, right? to break down the family unit, to be displaced, enfranchisement. And it's worked. It's worked through the 60 scoop. It worked through residential school. And I think this concept of coming home, and Erika and I had great talks about, I do love St. Catharines as much as it is Pleasantville. Because it's my home. It's all I've ever known, right? And my family worked so hard to find a safe haven here. And I keep thinking through that trauma lens is just being safe and being centered. And I have my circle and my table is small and it provides. And I think for those who are seeking identity through their ancestry, it's a patient process. It's a healing process. You have to unpack some of that colonial trauma and be able to say, like, this isn't my fault, right? Like 60 Scoop did a number on many people. And we're talking about the 1960s, which wasn't that long ago. My parents were born. So I just keep thinking about that when speaking to, like, we're talking about being mentors to other people, speaking to younger generations, speaking to students, right? Is to have that patience to be able to go through the process. And sometimes community does not look the same for everybody. And it's really about finding out who your safe people are to explore your identity for me. Building your own community. I grew up, I'll name drop because I know it's but I grew up with the Bells and I am still friends with them. And to be able to live in a community where I had another minority family, like a Black family in the community, like we grew up together because sometimes we would get targeted at the Avondale and we would have a hard time going to the movie theater. So we had those shared commonalities. So sometimes it's about a bigger scope of community and creating space and having other people hold space for us to kind of explore and have those conversations together.
That fire on both parts. I really appreciate the distinct differences, but how we can tie them together. Because again, when I think about what it was like when I came up here, one of my places where I was offered healing was through the podcast, because it's been such an incredible journey of being able to dive into Indigenous histories. And I know for both myself and Patty, I'm not speaking for you, Patty, if you watch this later, but I know we've had the conversation. That for both of us, it's what has been so healing is the knowing how the colonial narrative is exactly that there is a rule book. We were like, there is a book. They wrote a book and everybody got it, right? Because even though each place that was colonialized has their own unique stories, there are some very, exact things that happen to create those spaces, the ways that they create the conquer and divide. And so for me, when I was out here, two things. That being able to discover other people's stories and recognizing that even though it may seem different, it's really not that different, right? That built community for me. And secondly, just as you said, having that safe haven. For me, my challenge was that I had children and grandchildren who were going to grow up in a way where I had to be the anchor for them to understand where they come from. And so my advice as I, offer counsel and space to others is to recognize that you already know. This is another thing that I think is so important about ancestry. They're doing studies now about epigenetics, which is the study of knowing that our DNA actually imprints the experiences, good and bad, on your actual DNA. So there's a story about ancient Egypt, or Kemet, as it was called, when Africa was still a Kabilan. And they talk about that. You'll notice that we have the hieroglyphics, and then after a while, they just stopped writing them. And what the story is that the ancient Kemetics understood that they no longer needed to chronicle it because it was within. And so when we choose to tap deeply into our essence of ourselves, you already know, right? You already know what the story is going to be. And so it's taking that space of trying to discover who you are and moving it forward with people who are in your present, in your now, who are your safe space. So I just think that that works so well as we move forward, moving on in this space. Ancestry keeps us real, right?
I do speak from a sense of belonging, from a position of privilege, really, because, like I said, I've got that ebb and flow with when I'm Black and when I'm considered white. And my Granny Smith, you didn't tell her nothing. Like, she was not like, no, she was going to get it done. So she really instilled that in us. And she was like, okay, we're one of the only Black families in here. Like, she wrote a poem, which kind of was something that stuck with me. So the city of St. Catharines, that was where we settled. And there was another Black family who wanted to move into the same neighborhood. And the white community was like, absolutely not. We got enough of you Negroes. Like, no. And so they honestly were not, like, they were not going to let us. So my granny wrote the poem, and it was in a speech that I did when I was younger. I have, like, it's memorized. I've never forgotten it because it was that meaningful, but she had to fight. So she did that for us. So I grew up feeling a sense of belonging. I can say that my aunts and uncles did not. Like, they very much had to fight. Like, that's why I think the Smith name is that positive adjective now, because they were big, they were strong, they were like, they tried to do everything to defy what their white counterparts were thinking of them or trying to impose on them. So they just didn't. And my granny had that backbone, and my grandpa Smith was a sweet, sweet man. So he was like, he had that, you know, that gave all that love to make you feel welcome and accepted. And Granny was there to fight your battle. You want to say something to her babies? Like, absolutely not. She'll be there. So yeah, there's that side of it too. Like, my generation and my aunts and uncles almost all have biracial children. So I think they wanted to fit in. They had that feeling. It was also what was accessible to them, because like, just saying, if you look at the diversity, especially at the time, we're not about that. So it lent itself to a lot of my cousins are biracial. So it's a different experience from that generation directly to the one that followed. And they definitely paved the way. So it was not easy. They did not have the same sense of belonging that they were able to afford to us.
I'm going to just interject really quickly, and then we roll on. I understand that, because I'm probably, like, you know, a little bit older. I'm a little more seasoned as I stand in this space here, right? I'm a little spicy. And I know, again, as I remember my mother, I'm a 70s baby. And so when I think about, didn't get it, but her having to fight all the time. And I remember the first time I was called the N-word. I was 8. And we had just moved to Markham. So even in that little multicultural space, I think what really happened was there was only a few white families in this actual neighborhood. And I don't know if they were happy because it was a brand new subdivision when they realized who they were all surrounded with, right? They were like, wow, we are the minority here, right? So I think what might have happened, whatever was being indoctrinated, there was another little white girl. And again, what do I know about anything? I just see another white girl. I'm like, hey, let's play. I see a little girl. And so we were going to hang out. And she was like, I can't play with you because you are the N-word. And I was like, well, I didn't even know what it was. Didn't even know what it was. And I remember going, well, I won't play with you either. Whatever. So I went home. And I remember my mom was there, and I said, Mom, little girl said she doesn't want to play with me because I'm the N-word. What's the N-word? And my mother was like, what? 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 You go down that street and go beat that girl's ass. Don't do what I'm saying right now. Go find her and go beat that girl's ass. And I was like, what? Bet? That's how it goes? All right. I was always, right? No, I have no idea what it was, but I was just down for whatever at them times. So I went back down there and I picked that fight. I wasn't going to hit her first, right? But I picked the fight. I did beat her ass. And then I went home, right? And I asked her again, what was that? Because the fight happened. I had no idea. And she said to me, Kerry, you are going to be perceived different. It's a slur. She's saying a bad thing about you. But I want you to know that it means nothing and that you hold your head high, right? And she was scared of me after that. She ain't never touched me again. And we went to different schools too, but I had to walk past her house every day. She was scared shitless after that. But again, it was an adjustment for me to have to recognize how I was perceived. And that was the only time, right? After that, the climate changed slightly. But my husband, ironically, is 5 years older than me. And he grew up just down the street from where I live. Now we know, right? We didn't know it at the time. But he grew up about 5 blocks away. And he said to me that his experience as a Black male growing up, he fought every day. Every day he heard the N-word. Every day he was throwing down lids. Every day he was getting in trouble for that and was labeled. Every day they tried to hold his family back in school because they immigrated here. And, you know, even though they came in the West Indies, it's the British system, which is the exact same system, if not, dare I say, better than the Canadian system. But because of the color of their skin, they were labeled. And so they were held back. And I recognize that, you know, as we've evolved, as, you know, we become more integrated, the experience of our Blackness, the experience of being, you know, Indigenous has shifted. But there's still an underlying current that sits in the air. And I often don't want to get too comfortable because I recognize that as much as we got to pat ourselves on the back for the work that's been done, our ancestors didn't stop for us just to get here. There is still so much in the way that this system works that needs to be torn down. And the more I see how we are evolving and how the world is changing, here's my next question. What do you both believe is going to be the next phase as we move forward? And how do we use that to honor the ancestors? Yeah, I know it's a big one. Sorry.
I was sitting back like, ooh, I got like a good 3 minutes to think about this question. And my throat's so rusty. No, I don't know. You agreed. We talked like 3 minutes. We're wrecking rotation. Oh, man. What?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? No, I'm a mom of 2 boys. And I do see a shift. And we're talking so much about generational wealth. And I think that's important to also recognize more, like go home, hit Google, generational wealth. What does it mean? Why are Indigenous people where they are today because of generational wealth? And how has that crippled us not to have lawyers, not to be able to get medical, not to be able to be doctors? How is that? And we'll sit here today as two racialized women with our masters, which I think is unique. And I always say to Erika, like that is a unique, and we will use that power we've manipulated that system and we'll use it for good. But I think what I hope for the next generation, the next phase, a reclaiming, an unfolding, and unearthing. This generation is blowing us out of the water. They are so far advanced. They are so kind. And my son recently just experienced racism for the first time at 15. And I openly, blatantly racism from an adult male. I know. But I called my friend. I called my friend Natasha and I said, this is a blessing. This is the first time he's 16, and I remember getting it younger and maybe he's received microaggressions, but for the very first time at 15, he had an adult male who was just like, cut your hair. You dirty Indian, cut your hair. And I'm like, this doesn't feel right. But the way in which he took a platform and he was vocal about it and he asked for support from the community on Instagram, and people are coming up to me in public and being like, is that your son? I'm like, yeah, that's my son. I can't believe it. So for them, I think I want to take their lead, right? I'm always going to be guided by making those great decisions. And as we're getting a little bit older, we enter these phases. I hope for this new generation that's coming that they don't forget. And I'm mindful of the work that my father did and my mother did and my grandparents did and that we continue to do today. So we're doing a lot of work. Looking at my best friend, we're doing a lot of work. So I don't know if I have an answer. I don't know if that was an answer. It was a bit of a ramble. It is real. So I'm going to leave it up to this generation to really tell us and to listen, to hold space. Like even today, there was no script. It was about us telling our truth and really finding out how to unearth parts of ourselves that were silenced for a very long time.
I think that is beautiful. And I truly hope that we're on to a brighter future for our youth. I feel like the pandemic opened my eyes to I hate to say, the resiliency of racism and racist attitudes, and almost dare I mention, the Freedom Convoy, and as a like the collective deep breath. Like, can you guys breathe? Because we just took in all of that air. Because as a descendant of freedom seekers, and it was frustrating, and you saw people justifying standing next to white supremacists because they wanted to go shopping, they wanted to go eat in a restaurant. Their definition of freedom, having never had to truly fight for it before, was offensive, and it just made me fearful that those racist groups were going to get followings because they found a commonality. And as much as somebody could feel like they would never, once you start to kind of see oh, my ideals kind of align, I think it's a slippery slope. And it definitely was something that made me feel oh boy, I was never under the impression that racism was gone or was even being minimized to the extent that it should be. But that just brought it back to the forefront and made me think, wow. And I can say from being in schools that there's blatant homophobia still present. There's still blatant racism. Kids are crafty. They know the areas in the building where it would just be hearsay if they act on any of that stuff. So it's still around. But I do agree that there are more kids who are willing to sign up for these clubs to hear other people's voices, to advocate for their friends, because they've seen through social media, as much as it can be a curse, it can be a blessing too, but they can see that no, we don't stand for that. This is not cool. And even an equity group that I was a part of at my old high school was that no, we're not going to stand for this stuff. We're going to speak out against it. We're going to make these people feel welcome. And it's just the fact that kids want to sign up because they feel a need for it, whether they're racialized, whether they're white, they know that it's out there. They know that it's wrong, and they don't want any part of it. I think is wonderful, but there's still so much work to be done. And I do think our future generations are capable of making even further headway. And I think a lot of it comes down to acknowledging that racism is still out there, it's ever present, and microaggressions are real. And I'm just starting to become comfortable in my own skin with calling people out on microaggressions and asking, what do you mean by that? Like, because I love to joke. I've got a great sense of humor. I'm witty. One-liners aplenty. But that's how my coping mechanism. Well, and I'm trying to learn to sit with it and then speak back without jumping down somebody's throat. Because a lot of the times microaggressions come in such a way where you're like, oh, that was off. Why would you say that? Like, what? And sometimes what I would consider microaggressions, when I talk to somebody from like the BIPOC, like, no, that was aggression. You were just being nice. You were just trying to make your way through it. Because a lot of our lives as racialized women, we've got to go along to get along. Because you start making waves, you start losing promotions, you start putting roadblocks up. But I'm hopeful that our next generations will continue to know that advocacy is the way, and to be allies, to be accomplices. Because I love, Ashley and I talked about this. I was like, I don't know, accomplice, that can mean like, when I think of an accomplice, it's like an accomplice to a crime, like you've done something bad. And Ashley's like, no, accomplice has more action oriented. You can't be an accomplice without acting. And it was a beautiful way for her to spin it right back around to, oh, because allies, you can just stand by. You can just claim that you're an ally. But an accomplice forces you to actually move, to put verbs in your sentences, to actually get out there.
I just adored this conversation. And there is so much that could continue, really. Like, I mean, we've just started to touch the surface. But I just got the sign. And so, in light of time, I just want to offer in maybe this one final thought. That as we take in our past and the accomplishments of our ancestors, I am reminded by a t-shirt that I still so want to get, which is that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I know that as I look back, I stand on all of those accomplishments moving forward. And this conversation has been such a reminder of the greatness and the resilience of people of color. And as we navigate our way through this system and we continue, things are bound to change. Change, it is a coming. Thank you both so much. I'm sure we'll do this again, hopefully. Gotta have you on the podcast. Thank you all. Does anybody have any questions? Anything, any comments, any feels? We're open to have the conversation. Anything you want to ask that, you know, you may not normally think you can ask? I think we're all open for that. Some of those questions.
Which, I mean, I don't even want to continue on with that, which a lot of people don't consider a real master's, but it's a master's. Yeah. So that's what my master's is in.
I am currently doing my master's of social work in trauma and resiliency.
I don't have a master's. I have a degree in intimacy and relationship coaching and lived experience. The school of life has taught me quite a bit. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you for that. Can right? Would you right? Could you repeat the question?
Yes. So there was a question from the audience online, which was, please share opportunities and events in Niagara to self-educate on Indigenous communities and Black communities and where they overlap for self-education on culture, issues, history, and I'm going to add calls to action.
Okay.
So again, I'll bring it back to middle of pandemic. Myself, Natasha Bell, and Jada Stainhouse, we co-founded Matter of Black Community Services, and we brought back the Emancipation Day celebration. And yeah, very proud of that. Yeah. None of us had ever organized in that way before. So that is definitely one way you can follow us on Matter of Black Niagara on Instagram, Matter of Black on Facebook. And Natasha Bell is the founder of Black 0905. And Natasha, I've grown up knowing her. She's always been a networker. She knows everybody. She knows where you can get the hottest deal. And she, no, honestly, she always knew where you're getting the goods. And she's channeled that into Black 0905, highlighting Black businesses in our community. And not only does she highlight Black businesses, but she also is well invested in highlighting the Indigenous community and events that are going on. So Black 0905 on Facebook as well as Instagram. She shares. Her power is in sharing and in networking and in connecting people. And I think those are definitely some ways that you can find out about this stuff. Also, and I have to give all of the praise in the world to the people at the First Ontario Performing Arts Center. Though they are community driven. They have so much heart. They're the reason we were able to get incorporated as Matter of Black. They helped us organize the online events using their platform. They are a great place to, they host our landing page every year for Emancipation Day and help us organize the events. Like I said, we didn't have an organizing background. We all have full-time jobs and they're not related to each other in any way. And it's just been amazing, the support. So the First Ontario Performing Arts Center, they've been amazing.
I'm just going to interject real quick before I pass it on, but that is very good to know. Very, very good to know. Thank you for that little tidbit. Right? What?
Yeah, and I would agree too. I think maybe push back and find out what organizations you're going to and what work they're doing for Indigenous communities and if they're holding space, especially this amazing partnership today that held space for us. So for Indigenous events, I go right to the Friendship Centers, a couple of community agencies, definitely a pack. And I'm seeing the partnership with BIPOC Market. Social media is huge, but I would really be pushing back and saying, where are you hanging out? What is that organization doing to hold space for Indigenous voices? And what are they promoting and what are they sponsoring? Because we need to see more of it in Niagara, in my opinion.
One thing, and we've got September 30th, Orange T-shirt Day coming up. One thing I always encourage, whether it's Black History Month, Orange T-shirt Day, any other Heritage Month, or especially, is we are all on our phones way too much. And we all love to scroll through things. So one of the best ways that you can actually inform yourself is by taking it upon yourself when there's something going on in the community, like Orange T-shirt Day. Follow Indigenous pages. Follow Black pages. Find the ones that speak to you. Find the ones that are local, because they're going to be projecting this information and putting it out there. And I mean this in no disrespectful way, but it's your job to seek these things out. And yes, we love to highlight it and to tell you all about it, but that's a part of your learning and your journey. And I say it's one of the most passive, but also effective ways is a simple follow. Make it a conscious decision to find somebody during whatever month or whatever celebration is being highlighted, because now it's going to be in your feed. Now you're going to be reminded the next year. You don't even have to seek it. Now you're starting to actually take control of your own learning and your own journey in being an accomplice.
Right? Okay, so powerful and powerful right there. What? I was going to do the blam on mine afterwards. For me, I would add into this mix, again, there's a local podcast that myself and Patty Krawick do called Medicine for the Resistance. And like, if you're interested in conversations that are around the very same things that we have discussed today and getting it from the viewpoint of an Indigenous person, as well as what I call myself on this, and it's so going to change, is an Afro mystic. We're going to change that. But again, that understanding, our podcast covers a lot of that information. And we talk to some really cool people to do that. You can also, so if you want that, we're also on Instagram under Medicine for the Resistance. You can follow Patty under, I think it's Danis is hers. And you can follow me as well under Kerry Sutra. And we kind of amalgamate both of those things. We're also on Facebook under Medicine of the Resistance. So that would be the other thing I add. And I loved both of what you said. I think it's time. I think it is time to close this, right? I appreciate both of you. You guys made this, right? We didn't need them. We didn't need them. This was spirit-led, you know? We let the ancestors speak through us. So again, I want to just say thank you. Thank you for coming in to attend this titillating talk. I hope it was titillating. I hope that you glean some information that will take you into the next phase of your evening and hopefully as you move forward into your life. It was a great experience for me. Everybody.